I never thought I'd say this, but I'm pretty sure someone's been watching me at night. Not in a creepy, sinister way. At least I hope not. But it's been happening for weeks now, and it's honestly starting to freak me out a little. It all kicked off maybe a month ago, right after I moved into my new apartment. I'm talking about those small noises that you try to brush off at first. Faint footsteps in the hallway, soft creaks that shouldn't be there, shadows flickering just beyond the edge of my vision when I'm trying to fall asleep. I'd tell myself it was probably a neighbor or just the building settling. But then it got more specific. I live on the third floor of this older building in the city. A place with character, sure, but also with that old floorboard creaking charm that never really goes away. It's not a huge place, just one bedroom, kitchen, and a living room that's honestly way too big for me alone. I'm a graphic designer, mostly freelance, so I spend a lot of time at home, sometimes late into the night working on projects, which is also why the noises started to feel off. Like someone was there, watching me while I worked. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe I'm just overthinking. I mean, who wouldn't be a little paranoid when you're new somewhere? But that's where the weird part comes in. One night, I was up late trying to finish a project, headphones on, completely zoned in. I got this sudden feeling that I wasn't alone, so I took off my headphones and listened. That's when I heard it. A soft cough, just outside my door. Not the kind of cough you'd expect from a neighbor down the hall, more like someone holding back a laugh or trying to be quiet. I froze. My heart was pounding, and I debated whether to open the door or just pretend I never heard anything. Then, out of nowhere, the door creaked open a crack, and a familiar face popped in. It was Jamie, the guy from the apartment next door. We'd met a couple of times in the hallway, exchanged the usual awkward, "Hey, how's it going?" but nothing more. He's this tall, lean guy with these intense dark eyes and an easy smile that somehow makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. I'd always thought he was pretty chill, maybe even a little mysterious. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but I'm sure I sounded way more surprised than I intended. Jamie shrugged, stepping inside like he belonged there. "Couldn't sleep. I guess I just wanted to check on you," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. At first, I thought he was joking, like maybe he saw me working late and was just being neighborly. But then, the way he looked at me like there was something he wasn't saying made me realize this was way more complicated. We ended up talking for a while that night, and it turned out he'd been watching out for me in a weird, protective sort of way. But why? And how long had he been doing this? That's what I needed to figure out, because suddenly, those noises at night didn't feel like just a nuisance anymore. They felt like the beginning of something I hadn't expected, something that could change everything. I swear I was half expecting him to laugh it off, maybe say something like, "Yeah, I'm just some creepy stalker, deal with it," and then bolt out the door. But Jamie didn't. Instead, he gave me this quiet, almost serious look and said, "Look, I know how it sounds, but I've got my reasons." "Reasons?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, still unsure whether to be amused or alarmed. He nodded and sat down on my couch, which honestly felt weird, like he'd just claimed the place without asking. But I didn't stop him. There's something about him that made me want to listen, to trust him even though I didn't know why. "Okay, so here's the deal," he began, rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to figure out how to explain something complicated. "When you first moved in, I noticed you seemed off. Not unhappy, just distant. Like you were carrying something heavy, you know? I'm a bit of a night owl, so I'd sometimes catch glimpses of you through that big window in your living room, working late or pacing around. I guess I got curious. Then a few nights later, I thought it would be easier to just check in." I stared at him, a little stunned. "So you were watching me? Like, really watching?" He smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, but not in the creepy way. More like looking out for you. I know it sounds weird, but I just didn't want you to feel alone." I blinked. "That's actually kind of sweet," he shrugged. "Maybe, but I get why it sounds weird." There was a pause. I wasn't sure what to say next, so I just nodded. "Well, thanks, I guess." He leaned forward a little, eyes catching the light from the lamp. "You want to talk about it? Whatever's going on." I hesitated, then realized maybe I needed someone to talk to. No one really knew what I'd gone through the last year. Moving here was supposed to be a fresh start, But some nights, the silence was louder than I could handle. So I told him, not everything, but enough. The move, the breakup that left me wrecked, the freelance gigs that barely paid the bills, and the sleepless nights filled with memories I wished I could forget. Jamie listened without interrupting, which felt surprisingly good. When I finished, he reached out and bumped my shoulder with his. "That please, Mez, man? But you're here now. And you're not alone." I wanted to believe him. After that night, Jamie's visits became a kind of routine. Not every night, but often enough that I started looking forward to them. He'd drop by with coffee or some random snacks, and we'd sit and talk until the sun started to creep through the blinds. He told me about his job at a local bookstore, how he hated mornings but loved his dog, and about his terrible cooking experiments. I told him about my chaotic work schedule and my failed attempts at making friends in the city. One evening, a couple of weeks later, he showed up holding a board game. "Thought we could finally settle who's better at Scrabble," he said with a grin. I laughed and let him in. We played until my fingers cramped and the room filled with our laughter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe things were going to be okay. But of course, nothing's ever that simple. One night, a few days after the Scrabble showdown, I woke up to the same noises, the footsteps, that soft cough. Only this time, I didn't panic. Instead, I got up and peeked through the peephole. Jamie was standing there, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, and his eyes lit up when he saw me. I opened the door without hesitation. "Hey!" He shrugged, like it was no big deal. "Thought you might like these." I took the flowers, feeling an unexpected warmth spread across my chest. "Thanks. You didn't have to." He smiled, and there was this quiet vulnerability in his expression that made my heart tangle. I wanted to. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the city noises muted behind us. Then, almost shyly, he said, "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside to let him into my apartment. The air between us shifted, charged with something neither of us had said out loud yet. We sat on the couch, the flowers between us, and for the first time, the line between neighbor and something more started to blur. That night, I realized those noises I'd been hearing weren't just random or spooky. They were the soundtrack to a story that was just beginning. And somehow, I knew Jamie was going to be a big part of it. We didn't jump into anything that night, not physically or emotionally. It was more like a gentle crossing of a line neither of us had dared to approach before. We talked for hours, sprawled awkwardly on my living room floor, the bouquet between us slowly wilting on the coffee table. I found myself opening up more than I expected, and Jamie listened like every word mattered. There was no pressure, no judgment, just this quiet, warm space that made the heavy stuff feel lighter. A few days later, the city finally gave us a break from the endless rain, and Jamie invited me out to one of those little street fairs that pop up in the spring. I was hesitant. Social situations still had this way of making me feel exposed, but I said yes. Partly because I wanted to spend time with him, and partly because I was tired of letting fear call the shots. The fair was alive with color and noise, the smells of grilled food and cotton candy mingling with the scent of fresh rain on pavement. Jamie was easy to be around, cracking jokes and nudging me toward the various booths with a grin that never quite left his face. We shared a funnel cake that was way too messy and tried our luck at a ring toss game that Jamie swore he was going to win, but didn't. At one point, we found ourselves sitting on a park bench, watching street performers juggle fire and balance on unicycles. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows, and the city felt less like this vast, intimidating place, and more like a patchwork of moments, little pockets of magic. Jamie looked over at me, his brow furrowed like he was gathering courage. "Hey," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Shoot," I said, trying to keep my voice casual even though my heart was suddenly racing. "Why didn't you tell me about the breakup earlier?" "I mean, I knew something was going on, but you didn't really say much." I shrugged, looking down at my hands. "I guess I didn't want to seem sad or broken. It's easier to pretend everything's fine, you know?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that. But pretending doesn't really help anyone, least of all you." His words hit harder than I expected. I realized that in trying to protect myself, I'd been shutting out one of the few people who actually wanted to be there for me. "Thanks for not giving up on me," I said, meeting his eyes. He smiled, that easy, genuine smile that made my chest tighten. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, as I walked home alone through the quiet streets, I found myself replaying the day over and over. The laughter, the shared funnel cake, the way Jamie looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. But there was part of me still holding back, afraid of what opening up fully might mean. I'd been hurt before, and the idea of being vulnerable again was terrifying. Still, something about Jamie made me want to try. A few nights later, my apartment door creaked open again, and Jamie stepped in without knocking. This time, he wasn't holding flowers or snacks. He just looked serious. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. I motioned for him to sit, curious and a little on edge. "I haven't exactly been honest," he admitted. "About why I was watching you those first nights." I blinked, waiting for him to explain. He ran a hand through his hair, hesitating like he wasn't used to being the one to confess. "I guess I was lonely too. Moved here after a rough breakup, and I didn't know anyone. When I saw you, working late, looking so focused but kind of sad, I felt this stupid connection. Like maybe we were both trying to figure things out. I felt my throat tighten. So you were watching me because you were lonely too?" He nodded. "Yeah." I didn't know how to reach out. The stairs are creaky, the walls thin, and I thought if I just kept an eye on you, maybe I could find the right moment. I chuckled softly. "That's honestly the most awkward and endearing thing I've ever heard." He smiled, relief flooding his features. "Good. Because I'm awkward and endearing about a lot of things." We laughed, and for a moment, the weight of everything, past heartbreaks, fears, the uncertainty of new beginnings, lifted, replaced by something simple and real. As the night deepened, Jamie and I found ourselves inching closer on the couch, the space between us charged with unspoken feelings. Then, without any grand gestures or dramatic confessions, our hands found each other. It wasn't perfect or cinematic, but it was ours. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the scariest noises at night are just the sound of two people trying to find their way to each other. After that night, things between Jamie and me shifted, but not in the way you'd expect from some cliché romantic movie. There were no sudden declarations or whirlwind moments, just a quiet understanding settling in like the late-night city fog outside my window. We started spending more time together, but it felt natural, like slipping into a well-worn sweater instead of trying on something new and stiff. One evening, a week or so later, Jamie knocked on my door around 8 p.m. He was holding a battered guitar case, looking a little less composed than usual. "I was hoping you'd be up for some music," he said, a flicker of nerves in his eyes. I smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "You play?" "Only when no one's watching," he admitted. We settled in the living room, and he pulled the guitar out, tuning it with that careful focus you see in people who truly love what they do but rarely share it. He started playing softly, a slow, mellow tune that filled the room without overwhelming it. The sound was raw and warm, and I found myself drawn in, watching the way his fingers moved across the frets, the slight crease in his forehead as he concentrated. When the song ended, he looked up, cheeks flushed. "So what do you think?" "It was really good," I said honestly. "You should play more often." He shrugged, but there was this glint of something hopeful in his eyes. "Maybe with you around I will." That night, as Jamie packed up his guitar, I realized how much I was starting to crave his presence. Not just because he made the nights less lonely, but because he made me feel seen. A few days later, I invited him over for dinner. I'm not the best cook. My idea of gourmet usually involves a microwave and a questionable frozen meal, but I wanted to do something special. Jamie showed up with a bottle of wine and a grin that made my nerves twist into butterflies. The meal was chaotic. Halfway through, I burned the pasta, and Jamie had to rescue it while I scrambled to salvage the sauce. We laughed so much that night my stomach hurt, and I realized how rare it was to feel that free. After dinner, we ended up on the couch, Jamie resting his head on my shoulder. The city light spilled through the window, casting everything in a soft glow. I could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body against mine. It was comforting and electric all at once. "Can I ask you something?" Jamie whispered. "Anything," I said. "Where do you see this going?" "Us, I mean." I hesitated, because honestly, I hadn't thought that far ahead. This whole thing was new and fragile, and I was terrified of messing it up. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I want to find out." He smiled, and it was like the answer he wanted. "Me too." The next few weeks were a blur of shared meals, late-night talks, and small gestures that meant everything, like Jamie leaving a cup of coffee on my kitchen counter before heading to work, or me finding a note taped to my door that said, "Thinking of you." But with every step forward, there was this underlying fear that came creeping in. Fear that I wasn't ready to open up completely, that maybe I was just fooling myself into thinking I deserved this kind of happiness. One night, after a particularly rough day at work, I found myself curled up on the couch, the shadows deepening around me. Jamie was there, as always, but I could tell something was off. "Talk to me," he said softly, sitting beside me. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'm scared that I'm not as ready as I thought, that I'll mess this up." Jamie took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Hey, nobody's perfect. We're both figuring this out, and I'm not going anywhere." His words were like a balm, but I still felt vulnerable. "What if I'm too broken?" "Broken isn't a word I'd use," Jamie said firmly. "I see someone who's been through a lot and is still standing. That's strength." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that speaks louder than words. That night, something shifted. I let myself lean into the comfort Jamie offered, allowing the walls I'd built to come down just a little. It wasn't easy, and I'm guessing it never will be completely. But with Jamie by my side, watching out for me, not just at night, but in every moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could learn to heal. And that scared me more than anything, but also made me hopeful in a way I hadn't been for a long time. After that night, the rhythm between Jamie and me felt different, less uncertain, more steady. But real life doesn't just hand you smooth sailing. It has this funny way of throwing curveballs right when you think you've got things figured out. A couple of weeks later, I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying to meet a tight deadline. My laptop screen was a jumble of half-finished designs and emails marked urgent. Stress was starting to knot my shoulders so tightly I thought they'd snap. I was just about to close everything and call it a night when my phone buzzed. It was Jamie. "Pizza?" "My treat," the message read. I smiled, even though my brain was still scrambling. I texted back, "You just saved my life." When Jamie showed up, he had that goofy grin and the smell of pepperoni trailing behind him. He waltzed in like he owned the place. "Okay, maybe a little too comfortable, but I kinda liked it. Thought you needed a break," he said, dropping the pizza box on the table. I gestured to the laptop. "You have no idea. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that's packed with familiarity." Then Jamie looked up, eyes serious under the soft kitchen light. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I nodded, mouth half full. "Go for it." He hesitated, then blurted out, "Have you thought about us? Like where this is going?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been dancing around it myself, afraid to pin down the messy feelings fluttering in my chest. "I have," I said slowly, "but I'm scared it's too soon. I mean, I've barely figured out how to be okay on my own." Jamie reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You don't have to have it all figured out. I'm here. We can take it one day at a time." His words hit something deep inside me. I wanted to believe them. I really did. Over the following weeks, we settled into a pattern. Late-night dinners, spontaneous walks through the neighborhood. Afternoons spent tangled up in blankets watching terrible TV shows. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. One lazy Sunday, Jamie showed up with a mischievous grin and a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Pack a bag. We're going on an adventure," he declared. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "You're full of surprises." He just winked and didn't say another word. We drove out of the city, the hum of the engine blending with our easy conversation. Jamie had planned a trip to a nearby lake, a place he said reminded him of home. When we arrived, the sun was dipping low, casting the water in shades of gold and pink. We found a quiet spot by the shore and kicked off our shoes. The cool water lapped at our feet as we sat side by side, the silence between us comfortable and unforced. Jamie broke the quiet first. "I didn't tell you the whole story about my breakup." I turned to him, curious. "You want to?" He sighed, staring at the water. "Yeah, it was messy. Like, really messy. I thought I knew what love was. Then it all just fell apart. I didn't want to end up like that again." I nodded, understanding that fear all too well. "Being with you," he continued, "it's different. You make me want to try again, even if it scares me." My heart pounded, and I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. "Same here." We stayed there long after the sun disappeared, two souls quietly mending alongside the gentle waves. But life, as usual, had other plans. A few days after our lakeside escape, I got a call from my old job, something about a freelance opportunity that could actually pay well. It was tempting, but it meant longer hours, more stress, and less time with Jamie. I debated telling him, unsure how he'd take it. That night, I found him waiting by my door, his face lit by the soft glow of the hallway light. "We need to talk," I said, heart pounding. He nodded, stepping inside. "I got an offer," I explained. "It's good money, but it means I'll be working crazy hours." Jamie folded his arms, processing. "So what does that mean for us?" The question left me breathless. I hated the idea of my dreams pulling me away from this, the connection we were building. "I don't want to lose what we have," I said honestly, "but I'm scared I won't be able to give you what you deserve." Jamie stepped closer, his eyes fierce. "Hey, no matter what happens, we figure it out. Together." In that moment, I realized that love wasn't about having it all perfect. It was about holding on through the uncertainty, the late nights, the fears, and with Jamie, I was ready to try. Taking that freelance gig was a gamble, but I couldn't resist. It was one of those rare chances to really boost my career, and honestly, I needed it. The money, the experience, it all felt like a lifeline. Jamie was supportive, of course, but I could tell the longer hours were starting to weigh on him. Maybe he didn't say much at first, but I saw it in the way he'd glance at his phone, waiting for me to text back, or how his smile sometimes flickered like a candle struggling against the wind. The first few weeks were a blur of deadlines, caffeine, and late nights. My apartment felt less like home and more like a workspace, with sketchbooks and empty coffee mugs scattered everywhere. Jamie tried to be patient, dropping by whenever he could, sometimes bringing takeout, other times just sitting silently beside me while I worked. Those moments, him there, sharing the space without pressuring me, were the only things keeping me sane. One Friday night, after an especially brutal day where everything seemed to go wrong, I finally closed my laptop, exhausted and frustrated. My shoulders ached and my head was spinning with too many revisions and impossible client demands. I didn't want to talk or explain or even think. I just wanted to disappear. That's when Jamie showed up at my door, a bottle of wine in one hand and a goofy grin on his face. "You look like you need to get out of here," he said, holding my keys out like a peace offering. I hesitated, but the thought of drowning my stress in fresh air and something besides my own thoughts was tempting. So I grabbed my jacket and we headed out. We ended up at this little dive bar a few blocks away. Nothing fancy, just a place with cheap drinks and a jukebox that played all the guilty pleasure songs you'd never admit to liking. Jamie ordered us a couple of beers, and we found a corner booth that felt like our little bubble away from the world. As the night went on, I felt some of the tension start to unravel. We laughed at terrible karaoke attempts, debated over the worst movies we'd ever seen, and shared stories that weren't about work or stress. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of normalcy. Halfway through the night, Jamie reached across the table and took my hand. "You're killing yourself over this job," he said softly. "You don't have to do this alone." I looked at him, honestly seeing him for the first time since the workload had taken over. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Scared that if I slow down, I'll lose the momentum, that I'm not good enough unless I'm always proving myself." Jamie squeezed my hand. "You're more than your work. You're more than deadlines and client emails. You're the guy who taught me how to laugh when things get messy." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "I don't want to lose us." "You won't," he said firmly. "We're a team, remember? We figure it out together." That night, walking home with Jamie's hand in mine, I realized how much I'd been holding myself back, not just from him, but from really letting anyone in. Over the next few days, I made a conscious effort to carve out time for us, not just quick visits or rush dinners, but real moments. Lazy mornings with coffee and messy conversations, evening walks where we talked about everything and nothing, and nights where we just sat in comfortable silence. One chilly Saturday, Jamie surprised me with tickets to an art exhibit downtown. It was something he loved, and he'd been talking about it for weeks. We wandered through the gallery, surrounded by paintings and sculptures that neither of us fully understood but appreciated anyway. At one point, Jamie stopped in front of a large abstract piece and turned to me. "I think this is like us," he said, gesturing at the chaotic swirls and colors. "A little messy, hard to explain, but somehow it works." I smiled, feeling the truth in his words. "I like that." Later, as we walked back to my place under a sky full of stars, Jamie slipped his arm around me. The city felt quieter, softer. I realized how much I was starting to trust him, not just with my time, but with my heart. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. I'd catch myself overthinking text messages, wondering if I was moving too fast or not fast enough. Sometimes, after a long day, I'd retreat into my shell, afraid that I'd scare him away if I showed my vulnerabilities. One night, after a particularly bad day, I found myself curled up on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Jamie sat beside me, watching quietly. "Talk to me," he said gently. I hesitated, then let the words spill out. The fear of failing, the anxiety about the future, the weight of past mistakes that still clung to me. Jamie listened without interrupting, his presence steady and reassuring. When I finished, he pulled me close. "You're not alone in this. We'll face it all together." And in that embrace, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That night, wrapped up in Jamie's arms, I realized how far I'd come, from the guy who hid behind work and fear, convinced that loneliness was the only thing waiting at the end of the day, to someone who could actually imagine a future with someone else in it. Not a perfect future, because, let's be real, nothing about life feels perfect, but a real one. Messy, uncertain, but shared. Over the next few months, our little relationship grew in those small, quiet ways that mean the most. We weren't flashing Instagram updates or grand declarations. We were figuring out each other's rhythms, supporting each other through the chaos. Jamie became my anchor when deadlines threatened to swallow me whole, and I tried to be his when his own struggles surfaced. One evening, some months after all the noise and watching and awkward beginnings, Jamie invited me over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just him, his cooking, which I swear was getting better, and that easy smile I'd come to crave. After we finished eating, we sat on his couch, the kind of comfortable silence between us that felt like home. I looked over at him, grateful in a way I still struggled to put into words. "You know," I said quietly, "I never thought those noises at night were going to lead me here." He grinned, nudging my shoulder. "Neither did I, but I'm glad they did." We laughed, and then he looked at me seriously. "I don't want to just watch you anymore. I want to be with you, fully. No more lurking in the shadows." My heart skipped. I think I'm ready for that too. And just like that, no pressure, no grand gestures, just two people choosing each other again. Later, as I walked home under the city lights, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. A deep, steady calm. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And I was loved. Those noises at night? Turns out, they were never something to fear. They were the quiet soundtrack of someone caring enough to stay. Enough to watch over me until I was ready to let him in. And that made all the difference.